Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Gay with God. I want to tell you first off that I'm really excited to let you know that the Gay with God podcast will be recorded live. Now, you won't get to see me live, but it will be a live recording at the Wild Goose Festival this year on Friday, September 3rd at 10 o'clock in the Goose Cast tent. Now, if you've never been to this event, you really need to look this up. Google this thing. I had to, and it's really worth the time to look at some of the old speakers and some of the other things they've got going on there. So myself, along with my guest, Dr. Robin, will be leading off a full 2 days of amazing podcasters. Click the link on the Gay with God show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com to see Dr. Robin's bio and all the podcasters, performers, and speakers who will be at the Wild Goose Festival this year. And if you're going to the Goose, you can join the fun by being part of my audience during the live taping, and I would love to see you there. If not this year, check it out for next year because it really is a fabulous event, and they are very COVID ready. We had to post our vaccination card. We had to give them information so they could verify, and we have to have a verification letter before we can get into the festival. So it's going to be as safe as it can be. And I'm stocking up on all my special vitamins. And yes, I've been vaccinated, and I sure do wish I had that booster before I'm going to go, but it's this weekend and I don't think that's going to happen. So anyway, I am vaxxed up and I am vitamined up and we'll be fine. And I'm excited. So check it out. And later I'll be able to upload that live taping to this podcast and you'll be able to hear it. Anyway, so besides that exciting news, I have some more excitement for you. So I'm going to welcome back an ordained minister that I truly, truly care very, very much about. And Mark Sandlin is the Presbyterian minister at Presbyterian Church of the Covenant in Greensboro, North Carolina. He is a co-founder of the Christian Left. He also serves as the president and co-executive director of progressivechristianity.org. Mark was awarded the Associated Church Press's Award of Excellence. I'm not surprised. His work has been published on the Huffington Post, Sojourners, Time, and even on the Richard Dawkins Foundation. He's been featured on PBS's Religion and Ethics NewsWeekly and NPR's The Story with Dick Gordon. And back in the day, he was a returning guest on one of my little previous radio talk shows called Second Chances. And I've known Mark for years, just this way. And he even came to a wine tasting at my house and we had great fun. So I've known Mark for several years and he's a guy that I respect, and he's a guy that I think that you'll learn a lot from. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Mitch. It's great to be back with you. This is fun.
I know.
Looking forward to it.
We always have a good time, and you are so great. You are so great to do this always. So I think maybe my first question would be, as a minister, how did you not drink the Kool-Aid? And by Kool-Aid, I'm talking about so many ministers. It's like, especially from the church that I grew up in, and many of our guests grew up in, apparently, as we hear their stories, is that homosexuality is a sin. It's condemned by God. It's in black and white. And how can you say anything different unless you're just willing it to be true? So did you ever kind of drink the Kool-Aid and then you had a transformation, or did you never do that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I drank the Kool-Aid. It was more that it was the pool that I was swimming in. Because I don't know that I was ever indoctrinated of like that being gay is wrong. But I also was never educated about any sexuality other than straight. So when I would began to be exposed to anything other than that, it was more that was confusing, that I'd never been given any real information about what this is. And so something about it, I think at that age, felt off, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I certainly grew up in a church. I grew up in a Southern Baptist church through about late middle school, and it was there in your town, actually. And it's certainly, looking back, I'm 100% sure that they were undoubtedly preaching against anyone who fit in the LGBTQ community at all. I'm sure they were. At that age, it wasn't really ringing in my ears one way or the other, but it clearly impacted me, even though no one was in my ear saying, "Oh, you have to hate gay folks. Oh, gay folks are sinners," or whatever. it clearly impacted me because going into high school, I promise you, I'm getting to the point here. I was a drum major, and I didn't want to be. I was actually I was a percussionist, and I love playing percussion. And I was the youngest one at the school who got to play tritones coming into high school, which is a big deal if you're a percussionist. But then the band director told me he wanted me to be drum major, and he's really kind of told me I was going to be, and was sending me to drum major camp. Well, I remember thinking, well, only gay guys are drum majors. And I don't know where I bought this piece of information from, but
yeah, right.
I remember clearly thinking that in early high school. And I remember going to drum major camp with great intrepidation, like almost like I think maybe I was frightened that someone was going to try to convert me, and maybe that's because I watched all these Christians constantly trying to convert people in a different way. I don't know. But so it was definitely there, but it wasn't, I don't remember anyone in my life like preaching it to me, whether it was family or the church. But there was clearly something about my environment that fed me that there was something wrong with anyone who wasn't straight.
That's interesting, because I remember when I went to my first MCC church in Greensboro, and it was at the Unitarian Church off of Freeman Mill Road. And you go down this little road, and it's like a church in the woods. And the thing that was in my head was that, oh my gosh, I'm going down here in the woods with gay people. And I had that same kind of dread of, oh my gosh. And somewhere, you know, we get that information that homosexuals are predators. They're going to have sex with you. They're pedophiles. Right. None of this is true. But, you know, in the big, I'm not saying absolute, because we all have our things.
Of course. Yeah.
But that trepidation of, oh my gosh, something bad could happen to me. And that's so sad that we both had that somehow passed through the people either talking or something that was done on television. You know, I always remember that any show back in the day that had a gay person in it, they were either a transsexual that was some kind of murderer, or some sort of a sexual offender. I mean, that's all you saw. And so
that is true.
We kind of got it honest, didn't we? I guess.
Yeah, we did. But, you know, a part of me, though, does look back and say, if I had been provided with some counter information, it wouldn't have been the pool I was swimming in. Right. Like I would have went, I don't want to be in this pool. I don't, you know, but there wasn't even at that in that day and age, there wasn't really any counter information out there. It was in very unusual environments where children were being told, look, this whole thing about gay being a sin or somehow is wrong or somehow are only predators is a bunch of junk. There's nothing true about it. If I'd have just been provided some of that information, and I say but I think it's for all of us who may have felt that, if we'd have just had someone in our lives providing some counter information to what society was kind of subtly pushing on us.
Absolutely.
I think it would have made a big difference. Absolutely.
I was contacted by a reporter a few weeks ago that wanted to get some LGBTQ teachers to talk about getting LGBT curriculum into the sex education curriculum. And I said, well, I will be really surprised. I said, I'll reach out to some contacts, but I'll be really surprised if we're going to get an active teacher who is actively in a system to talk about this, you know, in the paper. And I was right. And I
for sure.
Because, you know, there's that, you know, morality clause, and we're not going to bring any embarrassment. And there's so many things that can happen to a gay person that becomes overtly out. We were only taught about the boys and the girls, and that's separate, and about, you know, a little bit of commingling, just enough to scare you. And, you know, none of it. That's so true. None of it was for me. You know, none of it really was relevant for me as I continued to go into my adulthood. But, you know, that would have been the time, you know, to start to give people a little bit of peace about their bodies and be able to have them ask questions. So were there any messages from your family growing up about homosexuality?
Not really, and nothing that I can remember specifically. There were certainly like sitcoms that would have characters that were clearly supposed to be gay, even though they might not talk about it. And the family would laugh at whatever was going on, which frequently was really the joke was about how the person was acting, which is kind of a horrible thing to make a joke of. And so there was probably some really subtle things like that were going on that didn't even feel wrong to me. And I was this weird kid who had this high sense of righteousness. Things needed to be right and people needed to be treated right, and things, we should all be better people and good to each other. Yeah. I was that kid, but I don't remember ever thinking, well, why are we laughing at the way the person's acting?
Yeah. It was just part of growing up with your family, and that's what they did. My dad told jokes. We all laughed at it because it was my dad. Even if I didn't get it, you laughed at his jokes. The day I didn't laugh at the jokes is the day that we started having a little bit of problem. But
hear you.
Well, that's very interesting. So then tell me, with the subtle indoctrination that you had, when did you start to put it together that you wanted to really figure out what these verses were and how it's relevant? When did that shift happen?
Well, it started, I always tried to stay in the church, and I always tried to be active in the church. And the more I went to church and even moved out of the Southern Baptist and into Presbyterian and Methodist, a little bit of Lutheran, the messages that I was hearing were still, while they might not have been directly anti-homosexual or anything like that, they were still kind of, there was a lot of judgment going on about whatever, and a lot of guilt. I should feel guilty, and I need to be forgiven, and I need to be, there was still this subtle hint of, if you're not the right person, you're going to go to the wrong place, kind of thing. And something just felt off to me. And ultimately, in looking into it, I wasn't ready to let go of Christianity. I've never felt that. But I have been desperately disappointed in what I was experiencing. And because of that, I started looking into liberation theology. I started looking into all kinds of social justice. And that's when Christianity finally started making sense to me, was when these became more central in how I understood the teachings of Jesus. So I think that's the foundation where me looking into the clobber verses ended up happening. Because of that foundation, I ended up leaving a business job and going back into school, going to divinity school. When I was at a very open, accepting divinity school, Wake Forest University School of Divinity, when it was in its second year. Two of my good friends happened to be a gay guy and a lesbian at the school in my class. We had the best conversations. It was eye-opening. It was brilliant and amazing folks. And so pretty much straight out of divinity school, I was like, okay, we're starting to hear more and more political ramp up about anti-LGBTQ stuff, and how all the rights that were being taken away, so that's when I started saying, this is important to me. I want to know a lot more about this, and so that I'm knowledgeable and able to have real conversations with folks if they really want to talk about what the Bible says about this.
Yeah. And it's sad that not everybody gets that, one, that they don't get the urge to dig deeper, and one, that they don't ever do anything with it, So all of us listening here today, probably, if you are gay, that the clobber verses are the ones that they use to clobber us over the head to send us to hell. And my family members had said that you're an abomination to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And I'm like, well, then, because it's in the Bible. Okay. Well, so there's a lot in the Bible. And we can always, pick and choose how we interpret things. But let's dig into some of that and tell us. Sure. First, tell me, when you look at one of these verses that seems so clear and it's in black and white, and it says you're an abomination to your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. How do you go deeper? I mean, how do you take a verse like that and figure out if it's really that valid?
Yeah.
the way it was written.
Well, for me, I went to divinity school.
Yeah. Well, okay. So everybody sign up for divinity school, but
that's going to help a lot.
We're gonna listen to Mark.
But they really did. They gave me the tools that I needed to understand how to contextualize and understand and to look at what might have originally been meant. I mean, because we learned that just about every verse. It's not just about these clobber verses. We learned that these are translations of original language, and frequently words are very difficult to directly translate. And so what I started doing was going in behind it and saying, let's find out let's look at the larger story that it's planted in. In some cases, also saying, well, let's see what the Bible itself says about these verses, because in one case in particular, the Bible says very clearly what the sin of Sodom was, and it's not what we keep saying it is. And so particularly for these literalists, that's my favorite go-to, because it's like, okay, if you're going to read it literally, let me show you 4 other places where it literally tells you what the sin was. And it was about lacking hospitality. It was about rejecting the sojourners. It was about marginalizing people, all the stuff that you're doing to LGBTQ folks. So
right now, people.
Exactly. So it's kind of like the perfect one to go to.
Yes.
But then the rest of them, you could get at the language that gets interpreted as homosexual, because honestly, hey, if you're a lesbian, you're kind of off the hook, because this only mentions lesbians once in the entire Bible, and it's not even saying what people think it says. So
see, that goes back to where probably God is a woman.
That's right.
And we're not going to tell on ourselves.
There you go. But in many of the places where it says homosexual, I mean, that is a phrase and a term and an understanding that has not been around that long in the terms of when the Bible was written. And so translating is typically very wrong, gives you one of those red lights should go off and go, okay, they didn't have that word back then. So what's really going on? So you get out and you look at what the original language says. And frequently what you find out is that it's almost always about 2 things, and it has very little to do with sex. It has to do with one person putting power over another person in one way or the other. So oppressing them in some way. Once again, that's interesting. People using these verses to oppress LGBTQ folk. But when you get into the original language, it turns out one of the issues it's trying to say is you shouldn't use your power to oppress someone in one way or another. In some of these ways, it's sexually. And it's also about being something other than you are. Paul in particular, the words that he used there tend to be about going against, in that language, what God created you to be, who God created you to be. And that's, for me, yet another one of those massive ironies, is that folks are trying to use this verse to scare people out of being LGBTQ in any way, when the verse is really about, you're supposed to encourage them to be who they are. Like, that's what this is really about. The sin, the abomination, is denying who you are. It is not being who you were created to be.
Yeah.
So
I was just going to say, and I can tell you that on the side of my side, the whole time in my life that I was trying not to be gay, what that did to me, and I know for all, so many of my brothers and sisters, is that, it creates diversion. You have to divert your authenticity. If you're not going to claim it, you've got to divert it. And so we get into, sometimes drug abuse or eating disorders or anxiety or so many other things to smokescreen and cover up our truth. And it takes years and years to unpack all that.
And I think that's such an important part of this whole understanding and story, and the way that people are using these very small number. For me, it's only 7 clobber verses. Some of the ones that they try to put in there, I think you're just working hard to make it more than 7, because that doesn't mean that's not about anything. But understanding what trying to force someone to deny who they are does to their life. That once you understand that, that's so antithetical to the teachings of Jesus, who was trying to help people have better lives. And be more inclusive. And so I think that's it, just as much as getting in behind the verses and figure out what's going on. Knowing what happens and how it impacts people when it's used as a weapon, like folks are using it, I think it's equally important in understanding that can't be of or from God. Right. If it is hurting people, if it's causing them to feel like they have to find something to replace it, whether it's drugs or whether it's depression or eating disorders, whatever. Well, if you're using it that way, if that's what the outcome is, I have a hard time believing that it was used in love. I have a hard time believing that it is of love, which means I have a hard time believing it's from God.
Well, and I can tell you that the conversations I've had with, previous friends and family, there was no love coming from that. I mean, they try to disguise it as love. I'm trying to save you. I love you. I'm trying to save you. But I didn't feel the love. Right. I have felt love from other people. That wasn't it. That's clearly not it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing about the Bible verses, I used to do a lot of podcasts and radio shows about these particular ones and my breakdown of it, my take on them. And I've gotten to the point, I just don't do that much anymore because my bigger picture now is the reality is the Bible is not interested in that question. So why are we spending so much time dealing with these stupid interpretations when overall the entire Bible really is genuinely, I would say, disinterested in that question? If it were that important, Jesus would have said something about it.
I love that. I love that. That's a statement that I just love. If it was that important, Jesus would have said something about it. And he said, absolutely, zippo.
Not one thing.
Diddly squat.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. So while we're talking about these verses, is that article that you wrote still available for people? And where can they find that? Because he wrote this great article. It's one of the first things I ever read from him.
I appreciate it. It is all kinds of places. You can find it at my website, Rev Mark Sandlin, REV Mark SANDLIN .com. It's there. But you also can just go to Google and search clobbering biblical gay bashing, and it will pop up. And it was interpreted in like 7 or 8 different languages. It's all over the place. I lost control of it at some point. I know that it had like 2 million shares and reads at some point.
Wow.
And then it just went more nuts. And I don't know where it is all over the place. And I don't know what the numbers would be at this point. Here's what I do know. Much more important than those numbers. I've had 3 different people over the course of these 15 some years since I've written it, who've contacted me and said they read it and decided not to kill themselves.
God bless you.
Those numbers, that's all that matters right there.
That's all that matters. And that's exactly why I'm doing this podcast, is because I want to bring people the validity that you can be gay with God and you do not have to kill yourself or choose.
Right. Exactly.
Just don't.
And I admire you for doing it and being so persistent with it too. It's needed and necessary. So thanks.
Well, I mean,
welcome. not just from me, but from all these folks that benefit from it.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, because I just had to do it. It's one of those things that you just had to do it. And living in Ashburn, North Carolina.
Hey, you even said it right. Are you a native?
I am not.
I'm just saying, you said it. I'm just saying, as a native of Ashburn, it sounded like you knew what you were doing there.
I've been here a long time.
Fair enough.
All right. So what verses do you want to talk about today?
Let's start with just the one we did with Sodom.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that, I think that's the one historically that's been used the most, has been the most damaging. And it is the one that's the easiest to defend. It's kind of what I love about it. It's so wonderful that the folks who are trying to make the Bible say that it hates LGBTQ folk. It's so wonderful that they've chosen the verse that's the easiest. Oh, really? Is that what you got from that story? Well, it's interesting because if you had read your Bible a little bit further, you would have found all these lovely instances where it makes it very clear that what was going on there was that more than anything was a lack of hospitality. I mean, hospitality, particularly for the Hebrew folks, was the most important thing in life. Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate that the story that's told has some sexual elements to it, because that's how it gets misinterpreted. But the real point in the whole story was that there were folks in need of hospitality, mm-hmm. and they weren't offered it, not at all. And because of it, they were judged sinful, to the point that Abraham's even arguing to try to save as many of them as he can at some point, But it's one of the things I think that frustrates me. And so one, is great because it's easy to defend. But two, it frustrates me because it's so obviously not about it. And it gets used over and over again. And it's the same thing about all the other verses that are out there. They aren't about what we're trying to make them to be. And as we said just a few minutes ago, there's so mm-hmm. few of them. I don't understand how we keep coming back to them and always feel like we have to dedicate so much time. And I don't just mean here and us talking. Yes. I mean, yes. Just in general, yes. The folks who are putting all this time and energy into hurting other people over mm-hmm. 6 or 7 verses that can pretty quickly and easily be demonstrated to be not about what they want it to be about, mm-hmm. when the rest of the Bible is telling us things we should be focusing on, mm-hmm. who we should be. And it turns out that those things are the antithesis of being against LGBTQ folks. It's against marginalizing folks. It's against taking rights away and making some folks less equal than others. So I just get really frustrated. I get very frustrated over that we, the ones of us who get that those verses just aren't about what they want, the other folks want them to be about, mm-hmm. that we still have not a lot of choice but getting sucked up into this discussion over and over again, when we should be focusing more on the biblical precepts that are about in making life better for everyone, which in itself, I mean, most of the lessons of Jesus negate all these negative interpretations of these clobber verses. Yeah. And so I guess, like I said, it's been a while since I've looked at these verses. Yeah.
And that's okay, because you're right. You're right that all of these verses get taken out of context, but they don't take the verses that are surrounding them. Okay. They'll throw in a verse that says homosexuality, but yet they'll ignore, adultery, or they'll ignore, divorce,
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. If you go to Leviticus now, you'll see all sorts of stuff that we're doing today that we're not supposed to be doing. But
the Bible is much more concerned about us eating shrimp than about someone's personal sexual life. Much more interested in that. And even though, the New Testament, the new law is supposed to kind of get rid of all that moral code to a sense, maybe not completely, but still Jesus didn't say anything about it. And I got my BA in theology because I was going to follow some kind of dusty road to Damascus, thinking that would get me to heaven. And I know for a fact that and I know I wasn't going to be a minister because, I was a woman. So I didn't get to take all those courses, but, and maybe they taught them to contextualize, but I don't hear it in any of the sermons that I grew up in. So I didn't hear anybody breaking it down. I didn't hear anybody talking about the bigger story. I didn't hear anybody talking about, what the Bible says in other places. It was always Sodom and Gomorrah. There's the sin. We didn't jump forward into the New Testament to see the word hospitality. I saw it later when I was at the MCC church that came out. But I'm just wondering, how do so many Bible schools get this wrong? How do they not learn how to write these verses down? I think, most Bible schools really, you don't see, let me put it this way. You don't see a lot of progressive churches with Bible schools.
Well, there it is.
Because that's a big part of it. But it also has to do with approach to the Bible. in many ways, in conservative Christianity, the Bible is so high and holy that people are almost afraid of it.
Mm-hmm.
They don't dig in the way that a progressive might, and don't question it the way that a progressive might.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more likely to feel perfectly fine with just listening to what the preacher says. Like, I don't need to read it closely because the preacher knows more about it than I do. And this is a high and holy book. And so I should leave it to the people who, that kind of thing. And so what you end up with is an organization where those with the most power pretty much can cherry pick and read into anything they want. They can say, here's a lesson I would like to teach. Where's a verse that backs that up?
Mm-hmm.
And then they can go and they can teach that that's what that verse means. And there's just not going to be that many people who are going to bother digging in and reading what happened before that verse, what happened after that verse, seeing if there's in between different versions of the Bible, is any word used different ways, which might mean it was a hard word to interpret. What else might it mean? So I think a lot of it has to do with just approach to the Bible. Is it high and holy and to be put on a pedestal so you kind of don't want to question it too much? Or is it an essential part of our spiritual heritage that tells us the story of our ancestors that has to be interpreted through a couple of languages that is important enough that it deserves you to take it seriously and to dig into it and try to understand what's really going on and contextualize it in the setting it was in, the language that's being used, and the stories it's being told in?
Well said. Well said. And you're absolutely right. The Bible school that I went to was not progressive. And I loved it. I loved it back in the day. I loved it. I was right where I wanted to be. And I still love the people from there. But I also know that it was a very narrow vision of the scripture. And you're right that no one questioned. My Hebrew friend, Charles Britton, they're all in the synagogue. There's questions and they debate things, and there's, you talk about things, and, could it be this? Well, could it be that? Well, I think it's this. Well, long conversations. But we didn't do any of that. Nobody raised their hand and questioned anything in church. And, So with your power of social justice, and you are outspoken. You are a very outspoken minister.
I appreciate that.
Well, and I love it. I love that about you. But how has that been throughout your career? Has there been problems with you being so? I have a little inside information. Go ahead.
I got ran off from a church. Is that what you're talking about?
I recall that you were there, then you weren't there.
Yeah.
And I was asking for specifics. I want people to understand that when a minister is authentic and leads from his heart, and he looks at the scriptures and he has things to back up, and you speak out, it's not always pretty.
No, it's not. So I was at a church that most people would have defined as mainline, semi-traditional, not necessarily hardcore conservative, but leaning that way. Mm-hmm. And long story short, they were in a bad position. And 6 or 7 years later, I'd brought in kind of my perspective. I wasn't being massively outspoken, but about halfway through my time with them, I did decide, if I'm not saying what I really think, then why am I doing this? Mm-hmm. And I'm not judging other ministers who are more of, I'm going to be with the people I am with and try to push some edges quietly and gently and try to expand, because that's one way of changing things. That's just not who I was. And so ultimately what happened was a small group, as the church was getting healthier and healthier, we were growing younger and younger. We had couples, we had a few LGBTQ folks who were regulars. We had folks who were in mixed marriages. We had folks who were recently homeless, and one that was homeless that was kind of coming and seeing us. Anyway, it was an environment that was making folks uncomfortable. And they 4 of the largest families said that they were going, as long as I was there, they were going to stop giving to the church. And they did. And we were feeding more people out of our weekly food pantry than we had in worship on Sunday.
Wow.
And I had just gotten them back to a balanced budget. They had been on a deficit budget for 15, 20 years. And if those 4 families weren't going to contribute, the church was going to have to close its doors. There wasn't any reserves. They'd been spending into the reserves for years and years and years. And so, I left. I was like, well, I'd rather see those families eat, because these were families that the existing urban ministries and stuff they'd already used what they could use to them. And so we were kind of the safety net. And so if we weren't there, we weren't going to be feeding them. So I told our session, which is our governing board, that I didn't have any choice, that I couldn't go through the 2 or 3 month removal process. That's the right thing to do. I just needed to walk away so that my salary wasn't killing their budgets, so that now that the family's not giving, so that these families can eat. It was pretty simple, because I knew one way or the other I was going to feed my family. I mean, I can make it work. I was fortunate enough in life that I had gotten a decent education, lots of advantages. So I needed to just trust in those and make sure that this pantry that we'd set up was able to continue and feed folks. And so for a year and a half, I didn't go to a church. I just kind of sat back and said, I need to assess what I'm going to do. And it was lovely, because it allowed me to speak out even more on all kinds of social justice issues, including LGBTQ stuff. So it was kind of a gift. It was difficult making a salary with a family that was good enough for supporting us when I was mostly making everything online one way or the other. But it was also a very positive time for me, because I realized that the speaking out, as I had started doing, really was who I was as minister, and that it wasn't going to work for me any other way. Yeah. And so I knew that there might not ever be a local church that I would match up with, but that I was going to keep speaking out.
And you found a home.
I did. It was the most wonderful thing. They contacted me out of the blue, and it's a very progressive church. They've had progressive ministers since back in the 60s and 70s. Wow. I mean, it's just got this wonderful history here, and I get to talk about the things that are interesting me. I'm getting ready to I'm in a mainline Protestant church. I am putting together a 3 or 4 Sunday series on queer theology.
Oh, wow.
How often does that happen?
Never.
In a mainline Protestant. Right. So it's a lesson in following your who you are, and we go back to that earlier conversation that in Romans, the abomination was doing something that wasn't natural. But that didn't mean natural in terms of there's only one way for sex to happen. It means natural in terms of who you are, living in and being proud of who you are. And that was kind of a real life lesson to me that, I was trying to navigate in a church without being fully me. And it turns out that it was a year and a half of being fully me where I end up having a church contact me saying we'd and it being such a great fit. There's a lesson of how this works, be who you are. That the mess that the clobber verse in Romans is about is there. It's the exact opposite, as it always is in these verses. This is about being who you are. That's what the natural that is in Romans is about. And it serves in many ways, not just in what our particular sexual orientation is or sexual expression is or anything like that. It's just that's an essential element of life that I think the Bible is actually trying to teach us, particularly Jesus and even Paul, saying what makes life right is being who you really are.
Authenticity is the key.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Speak it up.
Yeah. And, I do want to say I was fortunate enough that I began being outspoken when my kids were middle schoolish. And then while they were in late middle school, so it was when I was able to start writing and being completely outspoken. And in the long run, I was able to have conversations with them that I wasn't having when I grew up. And because of it, my eldest is trans male now, and it had a amazing, beautiful, accepting, smooth transition where the family was there, was like excited and positive. And Cadence taught us as well, lots of insights that we wouldn't have gained without Cadence saying, here's some of the realities. Here's some of the ways that you talk about this. And so it makes me go back to us talking about how important it is early in life for kids to have someone talking to them about a counter message to all these anti-LGBTQ messages that we see out there all too prevalently.
Yeah.
Caden is the happiest I have ever seen him in his life, probably. 27 years old now. So well into the beginning adulthood and establishing himself, but as happy as I've ever seen, living in to who he really is, being authentic about who he was created as.
That's beautiful. And that's the whole point, is that he had a family that supported him, through the transition. He had all of this support, and that's the key. I mean, the people who aren't making it are the ones who don't have that support, and they've just had all of this abomination shoved down their throat. And even myself, it comes down to whether or not you want to live a lie or get out of the life. It's like too hard. It's once you figure it out, it's too hard to know, how to live that life and hide. And we all do it from time to time. We all hide. But it's just too hard. And it gets to the point where if I'm going to go to hell, and that's what I told my first therapist, if I'm here to find out if I'm gay, because if I am, I know that I'm going to hell, and I'm not going to wait. And she just looked at me, and I said, I can't. I said, I'm not that kind. I'm an all-in kind of girl. So
I love it.
Do it. If I'm gonna go to hell, I'm gonna go now, and I'll just take care of it. And she said, so you're suicidal? And I said, no, because I don't know if I'm gay. And she was, damn, I hate working with counselors. You know exactly what to say. But I didn't know it, but I knew me well enough to know that if it came down to it and I revealed that truth, I didn't think that I could make it. I just didn't think I could. But but that's for the memoir. We'll go into that.
There you go.
We'll go into the memoir. But,
I love it.
But it's so painful, and I'm so glad for Caden, and I'm glad that you were there, and that it all organically happened. And not that it was easy all the way. I mean,
definitely was not
easy.
Society's not going to let it be easy right now.
No, not at all.
Which makes it all the more important that the people that are close to you in life are there for you and supportive and encouraging and happy for you. I mean, happy. Yeah.
And even, people will say, well, you can always go get support somewhere else. But I can tell you that when it's not your immediate family, even though the moms are hugging you and other people's family will adopt you, that sense of loss from that organic family that you had, your birth family denies you, or your birth family won't have anything to do with you. That's a hole that just doesn't mend. It just doesn't mend. You learn to live things around it, and you still can be happy, but there's still that little thing that you just don't, completely sew up, I think. It's always
I think you're exactly right. I mean, the relationship and what you thought they may have seen you as, and the belief in their commitment to you, it's really, you're suffering a death, because that idea is dead. You realize that it's not a real thing anymore, and that psychologically and even chemically in our brains, it is a real loss. And you can't end it. You can navigate it better. You can understand it more, but it's always going to be a real thing that's missing, that was once, at least in some way, there.
Right.
And it'll never be back, most likely.
Yeah.
Because even if you heal that relationship, you still will have that gap during that relationship where there was that period where your understanding of who you were in that relationship was lost for a while.
Yeah. And you couldn't trust them to be there for you during that critical time. And that's the trust factor people don't think about, but you've got to be able to trust that basic thing, trust the people that you were born to. And, for lots of reasons, people deal with that, not just being gay, but for lots of reasons, if you can't trust that birth family to keep you safe and to keep you well and to love you throughout it, it's a trust issue.
Oh, it definitely is.
You are so wise.
I don't know. I think I've been I've been exposed to enough life, and really, I was born with an innate caring for folks. I've just always been the guy, and I kind of, there's been times that I've been frustrated by that, but ultimately I'm really happy about it, because it is in talking with folks who are hurting. It's talking with folks who need someone to support them that I'm exposed to this way of understanding life. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's very honest. It comes from honest places. It's being with people where they are. It just is. Yeah.
So the 4-part queerology, is this going to be like in your sermons, or is this like a Bible study? So this is right from the pulpit.
Sunday. It's going to be from the pulpit, and we do a live broadcast.
Okay.
And our broadcast is viewed by anywhere between 5 and 25,000 people over the course of a week. So we're going to be getting it out there in front of a lot of folks.
That's awesome. And is it also taped that people who miss it can go back and watch it?
Yep. The live broadcast is on Facebook. It's on multiple sites on Facebook and on our YouTube, the Presbyterian Church of the Covenant's YouTube. And once it's live broadcast on Facebook, it's available almost immediately. And on YouTube, it takes half an hour or so, and then it's available there. But those will be up. I haven't quite figured out the dates on it, but I know it's going to be in the next month and a half that I'm going to do that.
Well, let me know. Shoot me a message when that's coming up, and I'll let the folks know here at the Gay with God podcast, because we definitely want to let everybody know about that.
Absolutely. Be glad to.
So before we end today, I have a final question that I'll ask you, but is there anything else that you want to say and put out there that you haven't said yet? Anything that you wanted
not off the top of my head, just to make sure, hey, outside of LGBTQ issues, outside of race issues, outside of all that, my message is just give a crap about people. Just do it. I mean, care about people. That's the bottom line. This world will be a better place for all of us and for our kids if we could all just learn to look at other people and care about them, not feel like we're in competition with them, not feel like we've got to be better in some way, not feel like they're after us. Look at them and care about them, because we are all worthy of love.
Yes. And I think that that's beautiful. And that could have been the answer to my final question, but we'll try anyway. That was really, really good. And I think a lot of people allow the fear to get in the way. Like Christians are fearful they'll go to hell if they love us. So they have to hate us so that they're hating the sin. And, it's all based in fear because they don't have this other knowledge behind them. And then we fear Christians because we know that they're judging us. And then, the radicals we fear because they might kill us just for being who we are. So, all of this fear is not allowing the love to come in, and love is reason. Love heals, and we just don't allow that to happen.
Oh, absolutely.
But the final question that I wanted to ask you is, and I think you've stated it, but there may be another answer you want to use, that what would be the message to the gay community that people need to hear about, not just the scriptures, but just in general? What would you want the message to be for this community when it comes to religion, God?
Just that the majority of churches are wrong. That simple. The majority of churches are wrong about gay folks, about LGBTQ folks. It comes out of, as you were just saying, it comes out of a place of fear, of misunderstanding, of decades and of indoctrination. But there are some out there that are a bit of a light. And I can promise you they are worth finding. Those communities are exceptional communities, regardless of it being a church. They're just the church communities that get that, that understand the importance of loving everyone and truly accepting people for exactly who they are. You will not find a better community to be a part of and to grow in. And then you get to grow spiritually as well. So I guess that would be the message.
Yeah, I love that. So I'll be putting my links to you and to everything that's about you so people can find you. And you'll let me know when the Queerology sermons are coming up, because I definitely want to be able to listen to that. And I want to thank you, Mark, always for your integrity and your caring and your compassion. I always know that I can listen to you and feel welcomed and embraced. And I thank you so very much for
that. Truly means a lot, Midge. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me here today. It's just like we said, it's always fun when we get together. It's always insightful and lots of laughs on top of it. So you can't beat that.
Can't beat that. Yeah, a little bit of medicine with a whole lot of laughter. Yeah,
it's good.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you guys as listeners for coming back each week, supporting and sharing and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to see more information and links to connect with Mark, I'll have them on the Gay with God show page, and you can get that again at empoweredmidge.podbean.com. If you're liking this podcast, please go and, give us a little love on a review, write something up, because they just love it when you review things. So if you're questioning whether you can be gay and be in relationship with God, if you are authentically gay, God has always been within you. Even when you didn't know it, you have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Stay tuned to hear how you can join the Gay with God community. And if you feel like it, check us out on Facebook. I have a Gay with God group there, and you can join us there as well. Take care, everybody. See you next week.